All right. So we're diving into something today that I think a lot of people will relate to. You're crushing it with understanding English movies, podcasts, even books sometimes, no problem. But when it comes to actually speaking,
Yeah.
cue the awkward, silence the internal panic.
Right.
Sound familiar to anyone out there?
Oh, absolutely. And it's super common. It's like a classic language learner's dilemma. And it might actually be comforting to know that there's a real neurological reason for that. I get it, but I can't say it
Okay,
feeling.
now that is interesting. I always thought it was more of a mental block thing, but brains are involved.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
So think of it this way. Understanding a language is kind of like listening to a song.
Yeah.
You recognize the melody, the rhythm, maybe you even know some of the words, but actually singing along.
Right.
That's different. That requires a whole other set of skills, like a different type of brain power.
So basically, my brain is playing this awesome playlist, but the karaoke mic is still a little scary.
Precisely. And the source material we're looking at today actually goes into the specific brain regions that are involved. We've got something called Wernicke's area, which is like the maestro of comprehension. It hangs out the temporal lobe, and it's all about decoding those sounds and figuring out what they mean. And then in the frontal lobe, we have Broca's area, which is like the conductor of speech production.
Huh.
It's the part that's responsible for taking those thoughts and turning them into spoken words, planning and executing all those complex movements.
Wow, so it's like a whole orchestra up there. But if Wernicke's area is already jamming out, why does Broca's area need so much practice to get on board?
Well, research actually suggests that Wernicke's area tends to develop faster in language learners. It's really good at picking up patterns, recognizing words, and getting the overall meaning.
Okay.
Broca's area, on the other hand, it needs more time and specific practice to build those neural pathways for fluent speech.
That makes sense. So it's not just me being shy, it's literally a neurological workout to get those words out. But speaking of shy, let's be real here. Fear plays a huge role too, right?
Absolutely. The source material really dives into this, and it's fascinating. Imagine this. You're about to speak English, right? And all of a sudden, your amygdala, which is like the brain's alarm system, goes off.
Uh-oh.
It triggers that fight or flight response,
Yeah.
the one, and it floods your system with stress hormones.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. It's like my brain thinks speaking English is a life or death situation back in the caveman days,
Right.
where mispronouncing mammoth meant you missed dinner.
Exactly. And that stress response,
Yeah.
it can actually mess with your language production, so your working memory.
Mhm.
That's the mental workspace where you put sentences together.
Right.
It gets overloaded. You might struggle to remember words. Your grammar goes out the window, and your fluency takes a nosedive.
So it's not just me being scared. It's like my brain is hitting the panic button.
Mm-hmm.
But if that fear is so deep-rooted, how do we even begin to get over it?
Well, one of the big things the source material talks about is the power of reframing. So instead of looking at fear as this enemy, try to see it as a sign that you're pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, that you're actually learning and growing.
Okay, that's a good way to look at it. But it still feels like a huge leap from understanding to actually speaking.
Yeah.
The source material also talked about something called the vocabulary gap. Is that where we can start to bridge that divide?
Absolutely. Vocabulary. That's like the foundation of any language. You can't build a skyscraper without strong foundations, right?
So true, but just memorizing lists of words feels so boring.
Yeah.
The source material had some more creative ideas for expanding vocabulary, right?
Oh, definitely. It goes way beyond flashcards.
Hmm.
One technique that really stood out to me is called spaced repetition. And it's based on this idea that we learn best when we space out our review sessions over time.
Okay.
And there are even apps that can help you do this automatically, like Anki or Memrise.
Spaced repetition.
Hmm.
I like
Ah.
that. It's like building muscle memory, but for your brain. There was another tip that I really connected with, using those new words in context, even if you're just talking to yourself.
Yes, the source material is all about the importance of recall and retrieval.
Okay.
Instead of just passively reading definitions, try to use those new words in sentences, write short stories, or even have like imaginary conversations in English.
I can get behind that. It's like taking those words out for a test drive,
Yeah,
seeing how they handle in the real world. But even with a bigger vocabulary, there's still that fear of making mistakes.
right.
It never really goes away.
It's a universal fear,
Yeah.
and the source material addresses it head on.
Mm.
And what's interesting is how our brains actually learn from making mistakes.
Really?
When we make a mistake, it triggers a signal in the brain. It's kind of like a whoops moment, and that helps us solidify the right information.
So messing up is a good thing.
Yeah.
Sign me up.
Mm-hmm.
But seriously, how do we shift from being afraid of mistakes to actually embracing them?
One powerful technique is to reframe how you're thinking about it.
Mm.
So instead of seeing mistakes as failures, think of them as feedback valuable data points that help you learn.
I like that it's like those video games where you learn from every time you mess up, level up your skills, and eventually you beat the challenge.
Exactly.
Mm.
And this ties into the importance of practice, which is a major theme in the source material. It stresses that consistency is key.
Okay.
Even short bursts of practice, 10, 15 minutes a day, can make a big difference in your fluency.
So it's more about how often you practice than having these marathon study sessions.
Right.
Any particular types of practice that stand out?
Well, one interesting method is called shadowing.
Hmm.
So you listen to a recording of a native speaker, and then you try to imitate their pronunciation and their intonation,
Huh.
almost like you're their shadow.
Ooh, shadowing. I could be like a spy while I practice. That's
No.
way more fun than reading textbooks. But what about those of us who get tongue-tied with pronunciation?
Right.
The source material had some good tips for that too, right?
Absolutely. It encourages people to focus on the sounds of English instead of just the letters. Pay attention to things like vowel sounds, syllable stress,
Yeah.
and the rhythm of how words connect when you're speaking.
That reminds me of a tip from the source material, recording yourself speaking and then listening back.
Oh, yeah.
I know it sounds painful, but they say it can be really helpful.
It's a fantastic way to figure out where your pronunciation might be off or where you tend to stumble.
Okay.
It's like having a personal speech coach in your pocket.
And speaking of pockets, let's not forget about all those incredible language learning apps out there.
Right.
I'm curious, did the source material dive into the world of language tech?
It did, and it highlighted how these apps can provide structured lessons, personalized feedback, and even chances to connect with other learners.
It's amazing that we have all of this right at our fingertips, but with so many choices, it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Did the source material have any recommendations for figuring out this whole world of language learning apps?
One suggestion that I thought was really helpful was to think about your own learning style and what your goals are.
Yeah, okay.
Some apps are great for building vocabulary, while others are more focused on grammar or conversation practice.
That's a good point. It's about finding the right tool for the job, not just jumping on whatever's trendy.
Right.
But even with all the best tech and techniques, sometimes it's those inspiring stories that give us that extra motivation.
Yeah.
The source material mentioned a success story, right? Someone who went from being a hesitant speaker to a confident communicator.
Yes, and it's incredibly inspiring. This individual started their English learning journey feeling totally overwhelmed. They struggled to even put a sentence together,
Wow.
but they were committed to practicing every day, and they used a mix of techniques that we've been talking about: spaced repetition, shadowing, even recording themselves to see how they were doing.
Talk about dedication, but what really stood out to me was how they talked about their confidence growing along with their fluency. It was like this positive feedback loop, each win fueling the next one.
Exactly, and that's a really powerful takeaway. The more we practice, the more confident we become, and the more confident we become, the more willing we are to push ourselves further.
It's like that saying, confidence is not, they will like me. Confidence is, I'll be fine if they don't.
Right.
But let's be real, building confidence takes time, and language learning isn't always a walk in the park.
Yeah.
Did the source material offer any advice for dealing with those ups and downs that we all go through?
It did. And it stressed the importance of being patient with yourself and having self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that learning a language is a journey. It's not about reaching some final destination.
Right.
There will be days when you feel like you're making amazing progress and other days when it feels super slow.
It's like those inspirational posters. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
But sometimes those mental hurdles feel more like mountains.
Hmm?
Any tips for staying motivated when things get tough?
One suggestion from the source material was to set realistic goals and celebrate those small wins along the way. Don't try to achieve perfect fluency overnight. Instead, break down your learning journey into smaller, manageable steps.
I love that it's about acknowledging every milestone, even if it's just mastering a new grammar rule or having a 5-minute conversation without feeling totally flustered.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There's a huge global community of English language learners out there, all going through the same challenges and celebrating the same triumphs.
So true. And if you're listening to this deep dive, chances are you're already on the right track. You've got the curiosity, the drive, and you're willing to learn. Now it's just about putting those skills into practice one step at a time.
And as you keep going on this adventure, remember what we've talked about today.
Yeah.
Embrace those mistakes as opportunities. Practice consistently, find resources and techniques that work for you, and never underestimate the power of confidence.
That's a great way to put it. So to wrap this all up, if you can understand English, you've already unlocked the door to speaking it. Now it's time to step through that door, embrace the challenge, and enjoy this incredible journey of becoming a confident English speaker.
And one last thing to think about. What's one small action you can take today to move a little closer to your goal of speaking English fluently?
Hmm.
It could be as simple as repeating a phrase you heard in a movie, downloading a language learning app,
Mm.
or even just smiling at yourself in the mirror and saying, I can do this.
We believe in you now. Go out there and make it happen.
It did, and it really highlighted how these apps can give you structured lessons and personalized feedback, even opportunities to connect with other learners.
You know, it's really amazing to think about how we have all of this right there in our pockets, but it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
So many options. Did the source material have any recommendations for how to navigate this world of language learning apps?
Well, one suggestion that I thought was really helpful was to figure out what your specific learning style is and what your goals are.
Uh-huh.
Because some apps are great for building vocabulary, like we talked about, while others focus on grammar or practicing conversations.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's about finding the right tool for the job,
Mm,
not just jumping on the latest trend, but even with all the best tech and techniques out there, sometimes it's those inspiring stories that really give us that extra push. You know
right.
what I mean? The source material mentioned a success story, right? Someone who went from being hesitant about speaking to becoming a confident communicator.
Yes, and it's so inspiring. This person started their English learning journey feeling totally overwhelmed, like they couldn't even string a sentence together.
Wow.
But they were committed to practicing every day, using a combination of techniques that we've already talked about, things like spaced repetition, shadowing, even recording themselves to analyze their progress.
That's amazing. What really struck me was how they described their confidence growing as they became more fluent.
Yeah.
It was like this positive feedback loop, each win giving them the motivation to keep going.
Exactly. And that's such a powerful takeaway. The more we practice, the more confident we become, the more we're willing to challenge ourselves.
It's like that saying, confidence is not, they will like me. Confidence is, I'll be fine if they don't.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be real here, building that kind of confidence takes time, and language learning, it's not always easy.
Right.
Did the source material offer any advice for dealing with those ups and downs that are inevitable in this process?
It did. And it really emphasized the importance of being patient with yourself
Mm.
and giving yourself some grace.
Yeah.
Remembering that learning a language is a journey, not a destination.
Uh-huh.
There will be days when you feel like you're making amazing progress, and then there will be days when it feels like you're moving at a snail's pace.
It's like those inspirational posters say it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
But sometimes those mental hurdles, they feel more like mountains.
Yeah.
Any tips for how to stay motivated when it feels really tough?
One suggestion from the source material was to set realistic goals for yourself and celebrate those small wins along the way.
Okay.
Don't put so much pressure on yourself to become perfectly fluent overnight. Just break down your learning journey into smaller, more manageable steps.
I love that it's about recognizing each little milestone, even if it's just mastering a new grammar rule or being able to have a 5-minute conversation without feeling totally flustered.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole community of English language learners from all over the world
Mm-hmm.
going through the same challenges and celebrating those same triumphs.
That's so true. And if you're listening to this deep dive, you're already on the right path. You've got the curiosity, you've got the drive, you're willing to learn. Now it's all about putting those skills into practice one step at a time.
And as you continue on this adventure, keep in mind the things we've talked about today. Embrace those mistakes as opportunities to learn, practice, consistently find resources and techniques that work for you, and never underestimate the power of confidence.
I love that. So to sum it all up, if you can understand English, you've already got the key to speaking it.
You've unlocked the door.
Now it's time to step through that door, embrace the challenge, and enjoy this incredible journey of becoming a confident English speaker.
And one last thought to leave you with, what's one tiny action you can take today to get a little bit closer to your goal of speaking English fluently?
Hmm.
It could be something as simple as repeating a phrase you heard in a movie, downloading one of those language learning apps we talked about, or even just smiling at yourself in the mirror and saying, I can do this.
We believe in you. Now go out there and make it happen.
Yeah, it did. And it really highlighted how these apps can give you structured lessons and personalized feedback, even opportunities to connect with other learners.
It really is amazing to think about. We have all of this right there on our phones. But with so many options out there, it can get kind of overwhelming.
Right.
So did the source material have any recommendations for how to navigate this world of language learning apps?
Well, one suggestion that stood out to me was to really think about your learning style,
Mm.
and what your goals are.
Yeah,
Some apps are great for vocabulary building, like we've been talking about,
right.
but others might focus more on grammar or, practicing conversations.
Right, so it's all about finding the right tool for the job,
Exactly.
not just, jumping on the bandwagon of whatever's popular. But even with the best technology and, techniques and all of that, sometimes it's those inspiring stories that give us that extra push. You know what I mean? The source material mentioned a success story, didn't it?
Mm.
Someone who went from being hesitant about speaking to being a really confident communicator.
Yes. And it's such an inspiring story. This
Hmm.
person started their English learning journey feeling totally overwhelmed, you know? Like they couldn't even put a sentence together,
Wow.
but they committed to practicing every single day. And they used a lot of the techniques that we've been talking about, things like spaced repetition, shadowing, even recording themselves to analyze their progress.
That's incredible. What really struck me was how they talked about their confidence growing alongside their fluency.
Yeah.
It was like this, positive feedback loop.
Right.
Like each win fueled the next.
Exactly. And that's such a powerful takeaway. The more we practice, the more confident we become. And then the more confident we become, the more willing we are to kind of push ourselves even further.
I love that. It reminds me of that quote, confidence is not they will like me. Confidence is I'll be fine if they don't.
Hmm.
But, building that kind of confidence, it takes time. And let's face it, language learning is not always easy.
Right.
So did the source material offer any advice for navigating those ups and downs that are inevitable?
It did.
Hmm.
And it really emphasized the importance of being patient with yourself and having self-compassion,
Yeah.
remembering that learning a language, it's a journey.
Hmm.
It's not a destination. There are going to be days when you feel like you're making amazing progress.
Right.
And there are going to be days where it feels incredibly slow.
It's like those inspirational posters say it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
But sometimes those mental hurdles, they feel more like mountains.
Oh, yeah.
Any tips for staying motivated when it feels really tough?
Well, one suggestion from the source material was to set realistic goals and then really celebrate those little victories along the way.
Okay.
So, no, don't try to achieve perfect fluency overnight. Just break down your learning into smaller steps.
I love that. It's about, recognizing each milestone,
Hmm.
even if it's just mastering a new grammar rule or having a 5-minute conversation without feeling completely flustered.
Exactly. And remember, you are not alone in this. There is a huge global community of English language learners,
Oh, yeah.
all facing the same challenges and celebrating the same wins.
That is so true. And if you're listening to this deep dive, chances are you're already on the right track. You've got the curiosity, you've got the drive, you're willing to put in the work. Now it's just about taking all of that and putting it into practice.
One step at a time.
One step at a time. Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive today, remember what we've talked about. Embrace those mistakes as opportunities, practice consistently, find the resources and techniques that work for you, and never, ever underestimate the power of confidence.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So to sum it all up, if you can understand English, you already have the key to speaking it.
You've already unlocked the door.
Now it's time to step through that door, embrace the challenge, and enjoy this incredible journey of becoming a confident English speaker.
And one final thought for you to consider. What is one small thing you can do today to move just a little bit closer to your goal of speaking English fluently?
Mm-hmm.
It could be as simple as repeating a phrase that you heard in a movie, downloading one of those language learning apps we talked about, or even just standing in front of the mirror, giving yourself a smile and saying, I can do this.
We believe in you. Now
Yeah.
go out there and make it happen.